Every small town has one place where the truth shows up before the newspaper gets it. In our town, back in the early 1900s, that place was Rayburn's restaurant. It sat right near the corner where the wagons slowed, the railroad men crossed, and every important person in town pretended they were only stopping in for coffee. But nobody went to Rayburn's just for coffee. They went because if something was happening in town, chances were good that Eli Rayburn already knew about it. Eli was the owner, cook, cashier, dishwasher, and unofficial listener of every problem within 10 miles. He was a wide-shouldered man with tired eyes, a clean apron, and the kind of mustache that looked like it had seen more arguments than most lawyers. He opened before sunrise, when the railroad men came in with soot on their sleeves and hunger in their bones. He stayed open past supper, when the town officials drifted in, pretending they had just one small matter to discuss. Eli knew who was behind on a bill. He knew who was courting who. He knew who had a sick cow, whose roof was leaking, whose son wanted to leave town, and whose daughter could outspell every boy in school. But Eli had one rule. He never repeated anything he heard unless repeating it would keep somebody from doing something foolish. And in our town, that rule got tested almost every week. Now, this particular story happened in the spring of 1908. The railroad had been growing busier, the town had been growing louder, and Mayor Rupert McGee had been growing more convinced that our town was on the edge of greatness. Rupert McGee was a small man with a large hat and an even larger opinion of himself. He liked speeches, ribbons, handshakes, and any sentence that began with, "As your mayor." If a sidewalk got swept, Rupert thought there ought to be a ceremony. If a wagon wheel got repaired, he believed there should be a committee. And in 1908, Mayor McGee had decided our town needed something grand. A public bandstand. Not a little wooden platform, mind you. A proper bandstand. Painted white, trimmed in green. Big enough for holiday speeches, brass bands, school recitations, and, as Rupert put it, the proud advancement of civic dignity. Most folks just called it that thing the mayor won't stop talking about. To raise money, the town started what became known as the Nickel Coffee Fund. The idea was simple. Every time someone bought a cup of coffee at Rayburn's restaurant, they could drop an extra nickel into a little tin box by the register. The nickels would go toward the new bandstand. Eli didn't ask for the responsibility. The mayor handed him the box one morning and said, "Eli, every town needs a trustworthy man." Eli looked at the dented tin box and said, "Then why are you giving it to a restaurant owner?" Mayor McGee laughed like Eli had made a joke. Eli had not. Still, he took the box, because Eli knew that if he refused, Rupert would give it to someone worse. By May, that little tin box had become the most talked-about container in town. Railroad workers dropped nickels in after breakfast. Farmers added coins on market days. Children came in with pennies and asked Eli if 5 of them counted. Eli always said yes. Even Mrs. Meier from the bakery in the Balmer Building sent over coins wrapped in paper, smelling faintly of yeast and cinnamon. Mrs. Meier was a stout German woman with strong arms, kind eyes, and the terrifying ability to silence a room by setting down a rolling pin. She ran the bakery like a church service. Everything had its place. Everything had its time. And nobody, absolutely nobody, touched her cooling pies without permission. She and Eli had a friendship built mostly on trading food and insults. She would bring him day-old rolls and say, "For your soup, Eli, it needs help." He would send her stew and say, "For your husband, Mrs. Meier, he looks underfed." Her husband weighed nearly 200 pounds, but that was how they cared about each other. Then there was Michael O'Leary. Michael was not officially in charge of the railroad workers. There was no election, no badge, no certificate. But if the railroad men had a problem, Michael was the one who spoke. He was tall, red-haired, quick-tempered and quicker to laugh. He could argue for 20 minutes about a broken lantern and then give his lunch to a man he barely knew. Every morning, Michael came into Rayburn's with 5 or 6 railroad workers behind him. He'd slap the counter and say, "Eli, we need coffee strong enough to fix our manners." And Eli would say, "Michael, I ain't got that much coffee." That spring, the railroad workers had been putting plenty into the nickel coffee fund. They liked the bandstand idea fine enough, but mostly they liked the thought of the mayor having to thank them in public. Michael had already practiced taking off his cap and pretending to be humble, so everything was moving along nicely, until the envelope disappeared. Now, every Saturday night, Eli emptied the tin box, counted the money, wrote the amount in a little ledger, and sealed the week's collection in a brown envelope. On Monday morning, Mayor McGee would collect it and carry it to the town office. That was the system. And Eli liked systems. Systems kept men from arguing over memory. But one Monday in June, Mayor McGee came into Rayburn's restaurant at exactly 8:15 in the morning, wearing his best vest and his most important expression. Eli was behind the counter, flipping eggs. The railroad men were at the big table by the window. Mrs. Meier had just stepped in with a basket of rolls. And half the town, as usual, seemed to be either eating, waiting, or pretending not to listen. Mayor McGee cleared his throat. "Eli," he said, "I am here for the envelope." Eli nodded toward the shelf behind the counter. "Top shelf, under the molasses tin." Mayor McGee reached up. He moved the molasses tin. Then he moved it again, as though the envelope might be hiding under itself. His face changed. "Eli," he said carefully, "there is no envelope here." Eli stopped flipping eggs. The whole restaurant went quiet. Even the bacon seemed to stop popping. Eli wiped his hands on his apron and came over. He looked under the molasses tin, then behind it, then beside the flour jar, then in the drawer, then in the drawer again. Because sometimes a man checks a place twice just to make the first bad feeling go away. The envelope was gone. Mayor McGee turned pale. Mrs. Meier crossed herself. Michael O'Leary leaned back in his chair and said, "Well now, that's going to ruin the coffee." The missing envelope held $16.35. That might not sound like much now, but in 1908, $16.35 was enough money to start an argument that could last into harvest. Mayor McGee immediately began whispering loudly, which was something he did whenever he wanted everyone to hear him, but still claim he had been discreet. "I am not accusing anyone," he said, "accusing everyone. But public funds have vanished from a public establishment." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Rupert," he said, "this is a restaurant, not a train robbery." But the damage was already done. By noon, the whole town had heard 3 versions of the story. By 2 o'clock, there were 7. By supper, one version claimed a traveling salesman had taken the money. Another said railroad men had borrowed it to buy Union pamphlets. Another said Mrs. Meier had hidden it because she opposed outdoor music. Mrs. Meier heard that one and nearly marched across town with a pie in each hand, ready to throw both. The worst part was that nobody wanted to believe Eli had done anything wrong. But everybody wanted to know what Eli knew, because Eli always knew something. That evening, Rayburn's was packed. Not because people were hungry, because people were nosy. They ordered slowly. They chewed quietly. They watched Eli like he might confess into the soup. Finally, Michael O'Leary stood up. "All right," he said, "this is foolishness. Eli has fed half this town on credit and never once watered down the stew." Eli looked up. "I watered it once." Michael paused. "When?" "Winter of 2004. Michael nodded. "Fine, once, but not enough to matter." Mayor McGee rose from his chair. "The issue is not stew. The issue is civic trust." Mrs. Meier snorted. "Civic trust?" "Rupert, last month you lost the key to the town office and found it in your hat." The restaurant burst into laughter. Rupert touched his hat as if checking for evidence. But Eli did not laugh. He was thinking. That was the thing about Eli. He listened so much that people forgot he was also remembering. He remembered every person who had come behind the counter that weekend. He remembered Mrs. Meier setting rolls beside the register. He remembered Michael dropping off a railroad notice. He remembered Mayor McGee leaning over the counter to inspect the ledger. He remembered young Tommy Bell, the newspaper boy, asking if he could sweep the floor for a slice of pie. He remembered little Hank drawing on napkins. He remembered Clara Dobbs, the schoolteacher, paying for coffee with a silver dime because she had no nickels. He remembered the storm Saturday night. And then he remembered something else. The leak. Rayburn's restaurant had one leak in the roof, right above the shelf with the molasses tin. When it rained hard, Eli moved the sugar. But Saturday night, he had been so busy with supper that he forgot about the envelope. He turned slowly and looked up at the ceiling. There, above the shelf, was a faint brown water stain. Eli walked over to the shelf. He picked up the molasses tin. He stared at the ring of sticky syrup on the wood. Then he looked down at the floorboards. "Michael," he said, "bring me that butter knife." Michael handed it to him. Mayor McGee gasped. "Eli, what are you doing?" "Either solving your mystery," Eli said, "or ruining my floor." He knelt down and worked the butter knife between two loose boards beneath the shelf. The whole restaurant leaned forward. The board lifted with a creak. And there, wedged between the floorboards and the wall, was a brown envelope, water-stained, sticky, but sealed. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Mrs. Meier said, "Well, the thief was gravity." Michael slapped the table so hard the coffee cups jumped. The whole restaurant roared. Mayor McGee tried to look relieved and official at the same time, which made him look like he had swallowed a hot potato. Eli held up the envelope. $16.35, he said. "Less whatever dignity we lost getting here." Rupert took the envelope gently. "My friends," he began, already finding his speech voice, "this incident has shown us that in moments of uncertainty, our town must—" Mrs. Meier cut him off. "Our town must fix Eli's roof." That got an even bigger laugh. But Michael O'Leary stood up next. "No," he said. "She's right. We all came in here ready to hear a scandal. Eli has listened to our troubles for years. Maybe it's time we listened to one of his." Eli waved him off. "Roof's my problem." Michael looked around the restaurant. "Not if we all eat under it." And that was that. By the next morning, the railroad workers had brought ladders. Mrs. Meier brought rolls and coffee cake. Mayor McGee brought a clipboard and called himself the chairman of roof restoration. Nobody listened to him. Farmers brought spare lumber. The blacksmith brought nails. The school children brought a hand-painted sign that read, "Save the soup from rain." Eli said it was ridiculous, but he hung it behind the counter for 20 years. By noon, half the town was on or around Rayburn's restaurant. Michael O'Leary and his railroad men patched the roof. Mrs. Meier directed the food table like a general. Mayor McGee tried to give orders until he stepped backward into a bucket of tar. For the rest of his life, people claimed that was the most useful thing Rupert McGee ever did for public morale. And Eli? Eli stood in the doorway, watching the whole thing. He had spent years listening to the town, its worries, its complaints, its gossip, its debts, its dreams. But that day, the town finally spoke back. Not in speeches, not in promises, but in hammers, ladders, coffee cake, and laughter. A week later, Mayor McGee collected the Nickel Coffee Fund envelope without incident. This time, Eli placed it in a dry cigar box inside a locked drawer, nowhere near the molasses. By the end of summer, the town had raised enough for the bandstand. The dedication ceremony was held on a warm Saturday evening. The brass band played slightly out of tune. The school children sang slightly too loud. Mayor McGee gave a speech that lasted slightly too long. Michael O'Leary stood with the railroad men, pretending not to be proud. Mrs. Meier handed out sweet rolls from a basket and told everyone they were not as good as usual, which meant she thought they were excellent. And Eli Rayburn stood in the back, arms crossed, watching the whole town gather around something they had built together, nickel by nickel. At one point, Mayor McGee called him forward. Eli shook his head. The mayor insisted. The crowd began clapping. So Eli stepped up, uncomfortable as a cat in a bathtub. Mayor McGee said, "Mr. Rayburn, this town owes you a debt." Eli looked out at the faces. Railroad men, farm wives, children, shopkeepers, teachers. Old men who drank 1 cup of coffee for 3 hours. People who had argued in his restaurant, laughed in his restaurant, cried quietly in the back booth, and celebrated every small victory with pie. Eli cleared his throat. "I don't know about debts," he said. "But I know this. A town ain't made out of buildings. It's made out of who shows up when something leaks." The crowd laughed. Then they applauded. And for once, even Mayor McGee didn't try to improve the moment with more words. Years later, folks still told the story of the missing envelope. Some told it as a mystery. Some told it as a joke. Some told it as the day Mayor Rupert McGee stepped in tar. But the people who remembered it best said it was the day everyone realized what Rayburn's restaurant really was. It wasn't just where the town ate. It was where the town became itself. It was where railroad men and mayors sat at different tables, but drank the same coffee. Where Mrs. Meier could scold a man and feed him in the same breath. Where a lost envelope could turn suspicious neighbors into a roof repair crew. And where Eli Rayburn, who knew everybody's business, reminded them that sometimes the best way to handle a town problem was not to find someone to blame, but to pull up a chair, pour another cup of coffee, and fix the roof together. That was Eli's way, and for a little town it was usually enough.